What were the worst conditions soldiers in World War I went through? Probably the getting shelled while cowering in a muddy trench trying not to inhale mustard gas bit. Or being in no man's land in an artillery crater filled with piss and shit and maybe half a corpse and some settled mustard gas. You cannot leave the shell hole because the snipers and machine gunners are just waiting for you. But you cannot stay in there because you will probably contract some illness or go mad. It is also cold, raining and you are hungry and wounded and 17. Also some of the corpses are your close friends and one of them is still alive, screaming your name as he begs you to help him after a bullet destroyed one of his kneecaps. The trenches were pretty awful. Soldiers who were in the trenches for a very long time would get trench foot. Trench foot happens when their feet were constantly wet and their skin would begin to decay. I got it when I was working for shredding company. Our main plant shredder blew a blade. A 3-inch section of white hot shrapnel flew through the reinforced housing and into a wall almost 60 feet away. It weighed about 30 pounds once we got it free. We had to use the shred trucks and had to shred paper in the rain. It was Pacific Northwest storm, winds howling, rain dumping and I was standing in a puddle of water up to my calf. 2 days later, my foot hurt to put socks on, had the color of spoiled hamburger and it started to smell like rotting flesh. I noticed that while at work. It hurt and I noticed sharp tearing pain. My surface skin was rotted away and the second layer was exposed and bleeding. I managed to get to hospital and get abrasion done with a high dose cream to kill the bacteria and help my feet heal. I cannot imagine what it would be like to be stuck for months or even years covered in mud. Filthy water. Sometimes the men would pee again the mud walls or into helmets and all that sloppy mess would end up back in the muck. And no medical aid other than a pat on the back and get back at her speech. Wow, thanks for sharing that. I am sorry you went through that. It sounds awful. Taught a very valuable foot care lesson. Luckily, nothing so bad that a week of light duty at work and frequent sock and boot airing out could fix. Sitting in a muddy crater in the middle of no man's land, the space between frontline trenches, 4 days wounded and unable to move. The crater itself full of the exposed dead bodies that the shell exhumed. Maybe you recognize one of them. Maybe it is an old friend from your neighborhood. Raining constantly but not being able to drink any of the water pooling up around you because it is diseased from all the bodies. So you sit there, wet, cold, surrounded by dead neighborhood friends waiting to die of thirst, praying for the small chance that today is a day that your friends go over the top again and someone might reach you to help. If they do not, you will finally drink the toxic groundwater, and the next day you will shit blood and start dying of dysentery. Too weak to clean yourself off. Maybe the rain will do it. Maybe it will be the enemy going over the top. Maybe they will finish you off. Maybe they will fire mustard gas and you will be helpless. This choose your own adventure sucks. While in the trenches, constant artillery barrages of varying size and caliber. Instant death or disfigurement at any time. Insane over the top charges. Deadly gas depending on which way the wind was blowing. Literal insanity from artillery barrages. Living in the guts of your comrades while stranded in no man's land. Trench foot. Days without food. Days without sanitary water. Water with blood guts. Shit in it. Rats crawling on your face at night that are fat with the flesh of your comrades. Death from tanks. Death from airplanes. Death from sickness. Getting a minor wound in no man's land and bleeding out because no one can reach you. Nighttime raids into barbed wire and bullets. Shrapnel grenades. Hand-to-hand fighting. Bombs with delayed fuses. Homemade bombs. Snipers with amazing camouflage shooting at any chance. Death from desertion. Death from falling asleep at a listening post by execution squad. Incompetent leadership. I could go on and on lol. Written accounts in Ernst Junger's Storm of Steel say that sitting through an artillery barrage is like standing with your back on a tree and someone swings a sledgehammer at your head and misses by millimeters each time. Hundreds of times for hours, days. Wonder how many committed suicide. I'm not sure, but I would imagine it would be fairly simple to act reckless enough when you felt it was your time to go, given how risky everyday life would have been. Yeah. I imagine plenty of them jumped out of the trench and started running toward the enemy. A couple interesting things were brought up in Peter Jackson's They Shall Not Grow Old. When the men were recruited conscripted into the military, they would usually keep all the men from the same town in a unit. This had the disastrous effect that should the unit be destroyed in battle, it would effectively kill or severely hurt the town they came from, removing all the young men from the population. There were also the latrines, which sometimes were nothing more than a hole in the ground with a log over it, so multiple men could use it at once. Sometimes the log broke. Yep, my grandfather wanted to enlist underage with his high school friends, but his parents would not let him lie about his age, so he had to wait. He was 18 and on a boat to Europe when the armistice was signed. All of his friends had been killed in the same unit he would have been in had he gone earlier. Basically, I exist because my great grandparents played by the rules. It blows my mind how little people back home knew about the atrocities and conditions happening over there, wanting to sign up early so you could go and get blown up in a ditch and die. It wasn't a secret. Soldiers would come back on leave and talk about it. The propaganda machine made people want to go and fight. You were seen as a coward if you didn't voluntarily enlist. You had to be seen to be doing your duty. At some point, someone had the bright idea to dig a tunnel under no man's land to place explosives under the enemy trenches. I do not know which party started it, but after the first attack, the other party realized they had to do the same. So they started digging tunnels below the enemy tunnels. The enemy then started digging tunnels below those tunnels. This went up to 4 layers deep. Moving through these tunnels was hell. Digging them took a while, and it was muddy all the way through. There were often no good supports, so it could collapse at any moment. If you are lucky it would collapse on top of you, and you would die quickly. If you were not lucky it would collapse somewhere else, and you would slowly suffocate. When digging through the tunnel, you could sometimes hear the enemy digging if they were close enough. At that point, any sound you made would alert the enemy of your position. So you had to remain completely quiet and pray that the enemy would not dig into your tunnel. It does not really get much worse than these tunnels. Season 1 Peaky Blinders make me feel for Tommy. He was a tunneler and had to find with tooth and hand just to make sure he would complete his mission. That's brutal. Reduced to savage instinct and just attacking anything speaking German. My grandfather was shelled by the enemy, shelled by his own side, gassed by both because of wind changes, shot and wounded 3 times. Lost 3 toes due to trenchant because he was in muddy infected water for 4 months. Was repeat bitten by rats. Caught Spanish flu and survived. Volunteered for the Second World War where he was blown up and wounded with a bad shrapnel cut and burn. But fortunately then saw sense and supported train in the UK. Served 32 years only to be run over and killed by a 17-year-old drunk driver who had passed his test the week before. Life sucks sometimes. Wow. Your grandfather and mine were lucky to survive the war. Mine was charged with dereliction of duty and was going to be shot by his own side. What had happened was his officer, a lieutenant who he thought highly of, had been caught in shelling from his own side and had been badly injured. My grandfather tried to get the stretcher bearers to go to him, but they would not. Shelling was still going on. Grandfather grabbed one of his friends and had put down his rifle to pick up the stretcher. They rescued the lieutenant and got him to some medical help. Grandfather and friend were both arrested. Fortunately, the mother of the injured officer, Lady X, was friends with some high-ups in the UK War Office, wrote to commend the actions of the brave stretcher bearers for valor on the face of the enemy, so both ended up being charged with being in possession of a dirty weapon and fined 2 shillings. But anyone who survived World War I and went on to survive World War II as well is a total bloody hero. My grandfather, the oldest child, he volunteered as All Australian Expeditionary Force did and was accepted into the Australian Light Horse. After bribing someone to pass his horse riding test, he was then sent to Egypt. During training, fell off his horse and buggered his knee. Was sent to London where he assigned to be paymaster. Did that a while and he buggered his knee again while ice skating at Hyde Park. Eventually during a pause he was sent to the front. They were sending anyone with a heartbeat pretty much. He was assigned to a anti-air machine gun company, would later become famous for shooting down the Red Baron, did that for a while till it was over. Knee got worse, was returned to London and eventually Australia. Only did a few weeks on the front, but still can't imagine hell that must have been. Claykers. Imagine working 10-hour days underground where at any moment your tunnel could collapse, or you break through into an enemy tunnel and you have to fight them to the death with your bare hands or the tools you reusing. Birdsong is one hell of a book. I will have to check that one out. The Me by Pierre Burton was a very good read also. Having read quite a bit about the topic, I find World War I mesmerizing in its immense, useless waste. I would say it was the extended living in what was essentially an enormous U-marked graveyard. Artillery, including massive naval artillery, was concentrated on infantry formations, which churned the ground and solidus to an indistinguishable pulp. Whoever was left alive dug in again, rebuilding the trenches in the massive bodies and parts. There is a photo somewhere of a few soldiers resting in a trench. One has hung his pack from a human bone jutting out of the earthen wall. They saw death. Until they were inured to it, they preferred seeing bodies a few days old, as the faces would blacken and cave in. Then they could not recognize any former friends among them. Some battle lines barely moved a mile either direction for 4 years. The mines deployed in an effort to break the enemy's trenches left craters the size of parking lots, some of which remain to this day. The soil in the area is composed of a certain percentage of powdered bone from the men vaporized by the blasts. I could go on. It was a hauntingly morbid affair, fought for no good reason, and to no good end, which gave this incomprehensible horror the term the war to end all wars, to only be on the march upon the same territory in a mere 20 years later. It has got to be the gas, because that would have affected you well after the war. My great grandfather fought for Germany and then immigrated to the US in the 1920s, but my mother never knew him, because he died in his early 60s a year before she was born because of health issues related to the gas. My great grandfather, French army, lost a whole lung to gases, was a smoker all his life, and died at 80. Yeah, my other great grandfather on that side of the family worked in the coal mines his whole life starting at 10, smoked a pipe, and lived to be 98. A tough cookie for sure. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe for more videos.